Welcome to our explainer analyzing the dark history of 1347. Today we're diving deep into exactly how the Black Death spread and the absolutely massive impact of rats in Europe. We're going to look at how unseen forces managed to bring an entire continent to its knees.
So, let's jump right into this massive historical mystery. Think about it. What could possibly bring half of Europe to its knees without a single army? Because this unprecedented devastation, it didn't begin with an ambitious king or a massive battlefield invasion. No, it started with something completely out of sight, hidden deep below the decks of merchant ships.
Section 1. The World Before the Pandemic. A Thriving, Connected Europe. To really grasp the sheer scale of this devastation, we have to look at how bustling and interconnected Europe was right before the plague hit. It's a huge irony, really. On one hand, you had rapidly expanding cities, flourishing trade, the Silk Road, and daily Mediterranean shipping. This massive network was improving lives, sure, but it was simultaneously creating a high-speed highway for a pandemic. Because on the flip side, deep in the vast grasslands of Central Asia, a deadly and completely unknown disease had already begun its silent journey.
Section 2. The Invisible Danger, Rats and Fleas, the Microscopic Threat.
Let's shift our focus all the way down to the microscopic level to reveal the true villains of this story. Historians trace the root cause of this massive collapse to a tiny bacterium known as Yersinia pestis. To the people of the 14th century, this was a completely unknown, invisible, and frankly impossible to understand enemy. The way this played out was basically a deadly chain reaction. First, the bacteria infected fleas. Those fleas made a perfect home living off black rats. And those rats, well, they simply followed human trade caravans and merchant ships wherever they went. Without even realizing it, the merchants of the era were actively carrying their own doom right alongside their precious cargo.
Section 3. The Journey of Death from Kaffa to Messina, the Highways of Pandemic.
The crucial point here is how this biological weapon hijacked early human globalization to conquer a continent. Once infected rats escaped the besieged city of Kaffa in 1346 and slipped onto the sea trade routes, the plague moved with terrifying speed. Landing in Sicily by October 1347, the disease crossed borders in mere weeks, sweeping through Italy, France, Spain, and beyond. The speed of the outbreak perfectly matched the speed of global trade. Imagine the scene when those ships arrived at the port of Messina. Eager crowds rushed the docks, hoping to find exotic silk and spices. But instead, they walked into a literal nightmare. They found sailors dying in agony, coughing up blood, their bodies covered in dark swellings called buboes. Panicking authorities immediately ordered the ships back out to sea, thinking they could still save the city. But they were way too late. The invisible passengers, the rats, had already scurried down the mooring lines and set foot on European soil. Consider the gravity of that reality. Driven by those unseen rats, the plague completely bypassed the border defenses that proud kingdoms had spent absolute fortunes building. It swept through Germany, England, and Scandinavia in just a matter of weeks. Even the world's most powerful armies were rendered absolutely defenseless against a microscopic enemy.
Section 4. The Dark Days of Europe, the Devastation of a Continent.
This unstoppable progression created a horrifying human tool, an absolute panic. Communities had zero scientific understanding of what was happening. Having no idea about bacteria or fleas, desperate people naturally turned to myths. Doctors blamed pockets of bad air carried by the wind. Others blamed poisoned wells, or saw it as divine punishment. As the death toll skyrocketed, society just began to break down. It reached a point where people were abandoning their own infected family members, locking them inside their homes. Gravediggers simply couldn't keep up, leading to mass graves, while church bells rang day and night over completely empty streets.
50 million. Let that number sink in for a second. This staggering figure represents the upper estimate of people who died across Europe. In just a few short years, between 25 and 50 million lives were completely erased.
Can you even imagine that scale of loss? Nearly half of Europe's entire population just vanished. Entire cities were hollowed out, leaving ghost towns in their wake. And that was just Europe. Millions more were facing the exact same nightmare across Asia and North Africa. Section 5. The Consequences That Changed the World. A Transformed World.
When the church bells finally stopped ringing and the Black Death began to fade, the world it left behind would never be the same.
The massive loss of life meant a severe labor shortage, forcing economies to completely restructure from the ground up. Entire kingdoms collapsed under the strain, and the established power dynamics of the medieval world shifted permanently. The seeds of modern Europe were quite literally sown in the ashes of this devastation.
As we wrap up our analysis of how the Black Death spread and the devastating impact of rats, I want to leave you with this final thought. Sometimes history isn't changed by kings or armies, but by something too small to even be seen. We've seen how helpless borders and empires were against the unseen forces of nature. So you have to wonder, how vulnerable are our own hyper-connected modern global systems to the microscopic forces of the natural world? It's definitely a fascinating question worth asking.